Hello guys and welcome to my optimization guide for Hogwarts Legacy. This is the first of many videos I'm planning to make to optimize your game for your hardware. Uh, Now, before I begin talking about settings or anything, I will tell you guys that every single PC's hardware is different, unless of course you have the same hardware configuration. And this video is to help you figure out exactly what you want with your hardware, like what FPS you want, what you hope to accomplish with this guide, and so on and so forth. So just know that this is not a setting copy guide, so to speak, although you can if you want to. Like, I'm not saying you can't, but I'm saying you shouldn't look at it that way. You should look at it as a way of understanding the settings in Hogwarts Legacy and picking the setting that fits best for you. Well, I try to explain to you what each setting does. I feel like that is the best way to go about things, and probably the best way for me to show you exactly what I want. But with that out of the way, this is in the middle of the game. I have completed probably half of the game according to the percentage. Whoops, according to the percentage in here. And yeah, I'm level 30 and everything. Part of Slytherin house, not really relevant, but there you go. Now you know that. But yeah, that is why I'm in the game. So I've experienced most of the stuff in game right now, and this game has huge performance issues, hence why I wanted to make this video. But I still think it could be relevant even if you don't have performance issues, to kind of help yourself get more FPS or less stutters, and so on and so forth. So yeah, that's kind of why I made this guide. This guide itself, the optimization guide, will be split into 3 parts. The intro, which is right now when I'm explaining things here. The actual settings and the recommended settings. And then, of course, the actual showcase of the settings and what you can expect with the configuration with my hardware. Although that is not the same as your hardware, I think. I have a 3080 and an i5 12600K F. So if that's your hardware, then you can expect the same. But it doesn't matter. This is just the intro for the video. And this is for everyone, not just people with the same hardware as me. Like I said, I'll try to go in depth with certain things and try to actually explain what each setting does. And hopefully make you understand what settings will do what for you and what will help you out. And do note that for some reason, this game performs differently on each people's PCs, even if you have the same hardware. As an example, I have a friend who has my graphics card, a CPU equal to mine, with more cores though. And his game performs way better than mine does. And then I have someone with a 3070 instead of a 3080, of course, who has a worse CPU than mine. And their PC, that game can barely even run. It stutters all the time. I'll talk more about game issues and limitations after the intro is done. But just know that this game can run differently on different PCs regardless, which is kind of weird. I don't know why that's a thing. But with that out of the way, let's actually get into the settings. And yeah, let's hopefully see if I can't help you guys understand what exactly each setting does in the game and whether it's relevant for you and your performance. So yeah, here we are in the settings screen. First off, we have windowed mode, which I always recommend setting to full screen as soon as you can. Windowed mode is not good for playing games per se. Like, it gives you more input lag. But with this game having DirectX 12, I have been told that putting it to windowed full screen equals borderless, by the way, doesn't affect you like it does in DirectX 11 and 10 and 9 or whatever. I don't think it was a 10, but 9. If that means nothing to you, just know that always try to use full screen, even if it's windowed in front. There's also borderless full screen, which I think is technically what this is. But if you have the option to pick full screen, always pick full screen. Otherwise, pick borderless, and then lastly pick windowed. Because full screen typically focuses the game and all your resources in your PC on the game, where windowed kind of focuses everything else in the background and your game, and therefore it doesn't make your game perform as good as it possibly could. It won't break your game if you don't, use flawless full screen, but if you want the best performance possible, run the game in windowed full screen, and there are guides out there to make the game run in actual full screen. Like, I've done that myself, but it's just, it doesn't change much. At least not in DirectX 12. So just pick windowed full screen for your own, like, sanity, I guess. Because it's kind of best of both worlds. You get full screen, and you get, borderless, where you can click out of your game if you want without having to, like, go black screen or anything. For the people who don't understand what windowed mode actually is and what it does. So windowed mode in itself is just the window the game runs in. As an example, it's what you look when you look at the game's edge, like your screen's edge and everything here. If you only see the game and not the Windows bar or anything, that means you're running full screen. If you see the bar of Windows and everything else around, and it's like tiny on your screen, like the actual window here for the game is tiny on the screen, that means you're running windowed mode. And that means that, again, it doesn't focus its PC resources on the game itself. So always a good idea, again, to have it on full screen so the game focuses on the PC focus on the game that you currently have. But yeah, that's pretty much how it goes. Next up, we have the monitor that actually shows the game. Depending on how many screens you have connected, you don't really need to mess with it. But if you have multiple screens and for some reason your game is on the other screen, or you want it to be on the screen in front of you, or you want it to be on the other screen, you click this option, then you figure out exactly what your screen is. Typically, it would have some letters on the front of the screen, or on the case, or anything. I have an AOC screen and a Samsung screen. So here you can see that I have an AOC as the main monitor, and then I have Samsung as my second monitor. And if I want to move my game over to my second monitor, I can click this and the game will be shown on that monitor instead. But again, it's very important you figure out exactly what monitor you have and figure out what these options actually mean for you, because you're not going to have the same options here, depending on, of course, if you have my exact monitors, which I doubt. But it's very important anyway that you figure that out. If you have a single PC setup, this is probably not going to be a problem. But if you have weird issues and this option is kind of weirded out or something, then just select the monitor in front of you in case something weird happens with your single screen monitor or something. I've had that issue before in another game, but that's a long time ago, so I don't think it's still a problem. Then we have resolution. In simpler terms, the higher the resolution is, the nicer the image is going to be, but the more the load you put onto your graphics card. So let's say your resolution, which is the most typical resolution, is 1080p. Your FPS will typically be higher than mine because your graphics card has to work less, because your image will look slightly worse than my image will. Now, it's very hard to actually explain what resolution itself means, but just know that it tries its best to make every single thing on your screen kind of look... It tries to fill out your screen more with smaller... I want to say pixels, but I don't actually quite remember if it's pixels or if it's just kind of trying to render it at a higher... Like, again, resolution. But anyway, just know that resolution means the screen resolution you were picked inside your control panel on the PC, depending on like graphics card or whatever you want to mess around within. But if you have a 1080p screen and you have 1080p resolution, this is kind of where you can see that. If you have a higher or lower resolution, I guess technically you can mess with it if you want. But I would recommend messing with this outside of your game instead of in your game, if you have that going for you, I guess. But yeah, anyway, that's what resolution means. The bigger the resolution, the better the image. the lower resolution, the worse the image, and with better image also comes more graphics card load, and with less of a better image, you have less of a graphics card load. So if you're looking to get as much FPS as possible, and you have a 1080p screen, I mean, of course you would use the actual resolution on your screen, but you know, you can always turn it down to a lower resolution in the actual desktop. Up to you, really. But anyway, the resolution pretty much determines what is the basis of your performance, and are you okay with completely making the image look worse and getting a higher FPS? Because if so, it's always worth it to lower the actual resolution, if that is your focus anyway. Next up, we have rendering resolution, which is actually the resolution the game itself renders in. So you've selected this is your actual desktop resolution. The game sees this is the resolution you want. This is the resolution you have. Let me just turn this off so I can show it better. And here you're rendering the exact same resolution. It shows the game actually uses this as the basis for your rendering. Now, I think in some games you can actually turn this up so the game renders at a higher resolution than you have. But in this game, it doesn't have that. It just has the rendering resolution to the basis resolution, or the native resolution of the monitor itself. Now, as you can see here, it selects the resolution the game is being rendered in. Lower resolutions will increase performance. So what you're saying is you want to render the game at a lower resolution than your native screen, which is what you want if you want to get extra performance but make the image look way worse. Then you can go down one. And there you go. You already have better performance. You go down even further and down even further. Now, typically, I would only recommend going down in size if you have a very tiny screen. The smaller the screen, the less obvious it's going to be going down to a lower rendering resolution. So if you have a very small handheld device, for some reason like Steam Deck, playing this game, I would always recommend going to 720p down here, because it just performs better. Or even 480 maybe. It depends on how much of a focus you want to put on FPS and how much FPS you want. But lowering the rendering resolution can always help your graphics card load. Now, if you're talking about CPU, that's a completely different story. But if your graphics card is kind of filled out and it can't do anymore, lowering this will help it. But this is like an extreme case of doing this. So I would not actually recommend doing it unless it's like your last resort, technically. So I will stick this to native for now. And then later on, if I really need more performance, I can lower this and then I can up some other settings. So I would just, if you were just looking to copy my settings and my recommendations, then stick this to native and lower it if you're very desperate for more FPS. Next up, we have anti-aliasing, which again, you can see in the window. Like, this game does a pretty good job at explaining every single setting, but not actually what it does. Or actually, it's the other way around. It explains what the setting does, but not what the actual setting is. So here it says anti-aliasing improves the visual appearance of object edges and the overall quality of the image, which is a complete lie, by the way. When it comes to anti-aliasing, it focuses on edges on the screen, and then it tries to make the edge less pixelated, because you know how every single thing is made of squares in games and is made of pixels, so to speak. Very tiny squares, and if you build a lot of squares onto each other, you can't make it look round. Like, think about Minecraft, right? If you try to make anything in Minecraft, you cannot make it round. But if you go very far away from this structure, and you can still see it in the distance, it looks more round. So in other words, the same effect of going further away, things look more round, applies to rendering resolution and the resolution you have. The higher resolution, the less you'll notice the edges on objects being jagged and very square. And then if you feel like that is annoying and you want to get rid of those jagged edges, I would always recommend trying like on the lowest TAA setting if you can. Or just lowest anti-aliasing. This game only has 3, so... Yeah, anyway. I would recommend using NVIDIA DLA if you can, if you really want an anti-aliasing mode. Or if you... Or if you kind of have to use TAA high, TIA low is for like the people who think the image gets extremely blurry. Now the image does get more blurry with anti-aliasing. It doesn't improve the quality of the image unless the quality of the image considers only edges in the game. So that's a bit of a lie. But I always recommend just kind of not either using anti-aliasing or using the one that makes the image look less blurry to you. Then again, you're very limited in this game, so NVIDIA DLAA is probably the best one you can get if you don't want to use upscaling, which is the next setting, by the way. So it's completely up to you what you want to do. But again, I would recommend either leaving this alone and just going to upscale, because upscaling actually removes this setting, or I would just kind of use NVIDIA DLLA. If you can't use any of these, I would just recommend you use FSR2 for upscaling later on, and then I'll tell you why. So let's go down to upscale type, and then I'll go back to anti-aliasing later to show you exactly what I mean. So first of all, upscale type. Upscale technologies provide high resolution frames from lower resolution inputs, hence upscaling, you know. This can significantly improve performance. Some upscale technologies may not be available for your device. So what it's saying is, you have your actual resolution up here. Then you have your render resolution here. Your render resolution is the resolution the game decides it wants to, you know, see on this actual resolution. What upscaling does is, let me try MDFSR2 by the way. What the upscaling here does, it makes it so the game renders at a lower resolution and then uses an algorithm or AI, in NVIDIA's case, to upscale the image to look as close to 2560 by 1440 as it possibly can. I cannot talk about how convoluted upscaling technically is. What I will say is that it boosts your graphics card performance quite a bit if your graphics card is being limited or bottlenecked, so to speak. But I'm trying to do my best to use human language instead of technical language in this guide. So if you want more performance out of your graphics card, this is the way to do it in the game. And it also, on top of that, as a bonus, it changes anti-aliasing to off and uses the upscaling to kind of upscale the edges, which makes them look more round. Like, it kind of implements its own anti-aliasing in order to upscale the image properly. And it kind of rounds out the edges on top of that. So I would highly recommend using upscaling for that purpose, just because of the anti-aliasing looking bad in every single game. But if you want to actually have anti-aliasing on and not upscaling, or if you don't want to use upscaling, you're kind of forced to use an anti-aliasing mode. At least in this game, you're forced to use the low one. There's no off, so yeah, that's kind of bad. But anyway, rendering resolution has now been changed to 17.7 and 960, which is going to be what the game renders at. But it tries to output 2560 by 1440 now with upscaling on. So hopefully that makes sense. It tries to fake the image to look like the actual native image of my screen. Again, would always recommend to turn this on in any situation you can, unless you get very horrible visual artifacts, which is like sometimes ghosting, which means that you see a big blur behind objects, or you somehow manage to see dots being all over objects, or hair kind of looking like it moves with ants or something. Very, very, very small things that you might notice. If that annoys the heck out of you, then turn it off and use anti-aliasing instead. If you get those artifacts, sometimes you don't, sometimes you do. And sometimes it kind of affects different people in different ways. So if that's what you want to do and you want to mess with that, then you can go ahead and mess with that. So yeah, mess with upscaling as you want. Now, there are different upscaling types in every single game. You have the no upscaling, of course, which just uses native NAAA, and you can pick the rendering resolution yourself, which without upscaling, which just makes the game look horrible. You can also use AMD, you can use NVIDIA DLSS, which is NVIDIA-specific technology. You can't use that on AMD cards. And you can't use those on very early NVIDIA cards either. But it's the best option to use. But in this situation, or in this case, I'm going to show you guys how to use AMD FSR2, because it is just the general upscaling that every single card can use, even very old ones. So yeah, AMD FSR2 is going to be the example I use, but there are so many different ones. Just know that NVIDIA DLSS, AMD FSR2 are the two best ones. If you have an Intel card, you should use Intel XeSS, because that looks better for your case, I guess. Not I guess. I know Intel itself uses a different algorithm for its own cards with upscaling compared to any other card. But Intel XeSS, if you really like it for some reason, you can also enable it for other company cards, you know, NVIDIA and AMD. So pick your poison, I guess. Anyway. Again, I'm going to use AMD FSR2 as this example because it's more general purpose use. It's more widespread, I guess you can say. Or rather, it can be used on everything. So that's the one I'm going to showcase. Next up, we have upscaling mode, which just picks the rendering resolution. Like let's say you want to get the best performance possible. Your graphics card is very, very horrible. And actually it's very, very good, and you want to squeeze more performance out of it, then you just lower it, you know? Then just like, okay, now I only want 34% of the actual resolution, and I want it to do its best to upscale. Let me show you how that looks like, by the way. Not recommended. As you can see, I'm getting ghosting near the hair. Everything kind of looks very blurry. I am getting 157 FPS though, so that's always something. The game looks okay. It looks playable. It doesn't look horrible. That's the power of upscaling, by the way. So now you can see it in action. I would not play the game at this resolution, this render resolution though. This is because I see horrible artifacting around the character. So yeah, not the best rendering resolution to use. I would typically say go first for quality. Actually, first go down to performance, ultra performance. A lot of people say just pick quality mode. It's best for you. But I would actually say go for the opposite way. If you are turning on upscaling, it is either because you hate anti-aliasing or it's because you want more performance, right? So the best way to do this is to first go down to the worst performance possible. Look around in game, right? You need to look around in game, see, oh wow, how does this look? Okay, I think it looks horrible. Then you go into the settings. Then you go up here into display options. Then you go down to the thingy again. Then you pick, all right, I want my rendering resolution to be higher to AMD performance mode instead. Then you do the same thing. You go out. You look in the game. You look around. Okay, I can see that everything looks slightly better, but I still get weird artifacts near my character, but it's less noticeable now. And everything looks way better than it did before. Then I go into the settings again. I go up to the same settings. I say, okay. Now I'm going to go up to FSR2 balanced. This works for every single upscaling method, by the way, not just AMD FSR2. Right now we're not looking at performance, we're looking at how upscaling works and how you should try to go about it. So AMD FSR2 balanced, here we go. All right, so this is the next step for me. I'm gonna see if balance works out for me. Okay, I can now see that I have very, very, very slight character artifacting around my character. I'm getting about 30 FPS less than I did with the, of course you can't see that, but I'm getting way less FPS now than with the ultra performance one, but it's only 30 FPS less, from 150 to 120. Sometimes I still get 150. Now the game looks pretty okay now. I don't really see any big issues with balanced mode. Of course, if you look at small details, like those bushes over there, you can kind of see that they have some weird movement going on, because it doesn't really know how to render things far away properly. Especially moving objects look kind of weird, especially with AFSR2. But you need to figure out, is that a sacrifice you're willing to take to get more performance? That's kind of the question you need to ask yourself. How far am I willing to go to get more performance in the game? So I would just say, until you notice the issue in the game, is when you kind of should try to change that. Then again, if you are the person who want the best graphics, but also kind of try to get some performance above 60 FPS, because now you're getting a little below 60 FPS, then AMD FSR2 quality is the best FSR you can get. It renders the game at 60-something%. Now, I still think it looks very similar to balanced. I can barely see a difference, by the way. So, if I were to pick between these two, I would actually pick balanced to get the best performance possible. But the difference between them is kind of small. Like you will... It depends entirely on you. Like, do you see the difference? Is kind of what you need to figure out. Again, don't use mine as like a reference because this is being compressed to YouTube and everything. So you need to figure out where your limit lies and exactly what you want your settings to be and how you want your game to look. That's kind of what I'm trying to tell you here. So yeah, I would 100% recommend that you pick either the upscaling method you want or the one you would like to try out. You can try out all of them if you want, but AMD FSR 1.0 and NVIDIA NIS, both of them are very bad. I would not recommend trying those out, but Intel and AMD FSR 2, you can try those two out, see which one you like the most. There's also NVIDIA DLSS for graphics card people who have NVIDIA. Again, I would 100% recommend NVIDIA DLSS for anyone who has NVIDIA. Again, go down to mode and pick the one you want. You can also use DLSS off. I don't exactly know why that's an option, but anyway. There's also an auto option for DLSS if you want to just the game to pick for you to see which one it thinks is best for you in that regard. But it's pretty much the same again. Like quality, balance, performance, ultra performance. Typically, the further down you go, the more horrible it looks from quality down to ultra performance. But again, that depends on what FPS you want and exactly what visual fidelity you want in a game you paid a lot of money for. So, depends entirely on you and your hardware. So, just pick whichever one you prefer. I'm going to keep it off for now because I'm not going to use it right now anyway. Next up, we got upscale sharpness. So, sharpness is kind of... It makes everything pop more. How else do I say? It makes everything more nuanced. It makes everything more sharp. You know, it makes everything a little bit more crisp. Depending on how far up you pull this, you can make the game look extremely horrible, or you can make the game look way too blurry and washed out. So I like to keep this myself at 4 whenever I can. But in this game specifically, as of this video, as of right now when I'm recording it, I have huge issues with sharpness in the game because every single time I close the game, it resets to 0. I prefer 0.4 sharpness myself, and I would like to keep that sharpness, but sometimes I forget to turn it off when I launch the game again, and that just does not want to stay at 0.4. It always goes back down to 0. So I don't know if it works different with AMD FSR 2, because I myself use DLSS as the upscaling method, but it just does not want to show. But if you want to use upscale sharpness, you can start with 0.4 like I have, and see which way you want to go. Would you want it to be sharper, or do you want it to be less sharp? Some people say that the game looks best with no sharpness. I disagree. I think the game looks way too washed out. I just don't like that. But that depends entirely on you and what you want. So I would definitely say just mess with this as you want. But a good starting point is 0.4. You don't want too much. You don't want too little. Especially if you use upscaling. If you don't use upscaling, it shouldn't matter too much. Like, it's more for upscaling. This is why it's called upscale sharpness. It's supposed to make everything that looks a little bit softer because you upscaled it to be a little bit more like native. So if you really want it to just be used properly, you can just go ahead and look at what native looks like and then compare the two with like an image or something, and then make them look very similar with sharpness. So that's something you can do if you want to. But again, I would just recommend starting at 0.4 if you were using upscaling, and then see if you like it or not, and then change it depending on what you prefer. Just know that less sharpness is typically always better, but I would minimum 0.1 is kind of where I would put it. Next up, we have frame generation. Frame generation is sort of a new technology at the moment of this video, and the way it works is it inserts fake frames between 2 actual frames while it tries to predict the motion vectors of every single thing on the screen. and it just fakes a frame like that. So it's a frame that's made without any effort from your hardware, besides your graphics card, because it has like an optical flow thing going on for it. It's very complicated. I'm not going to go into how it's done, more what it is and what you should put it to. But just know that because there are fake frames being put in between actual frames, it doubles your FPS, but the fake frames don't look like real frames. Like, they both look worse, and they give you input latency, or input delay, or however you want to call it. How it does that is based on how it calculates things between two frames. So let's say you do a movement in the game, you see the movement, the AI has to predict, the AI in the card, I mean, has to predict exactly how the movement is going to be, and that takes a little while for it to kind of figure out, and then next frame gets popped in, and there you go. So it kind of slows down in order to put that extra frame in there, and that causes input latency to happen, and like I said, the frame looks worse. Now, this is a great setting if you don't mind some visual bugs here and there, and you already have like 70, 80, 90 FPS. Okay, 70 is a little bit on the edge, but maybe like 80 and 90 FPS. At least if you have above 100, I would definitely recommend turning it on, seeing if you like it, and then turn it off otherwise. But yeah, I would definitely recommend turning it on if you get above 100 FPS and you just want more FPS. But if you're fine with 100 FPS and you don't like the visual artifacts this brings you, then don't turn it on. And that's without talking about the input delay. The input delay can somewhat be mitigated by enabling the next setting, NVIDIA Reflex Low Latency. But I've actually found this setting to cause some stutter and lag every now and again, so I keep it off. And this is typically a setting I would recommend you keep off unless you notice you actually have an input delay. It's a must be on if you're playing a competitive game, as an example, like CSGO, if that ever has it. I know that CSGO doesn't have it, but Rainbow Six Siege or Rainbow Six Siege 2, if they're ever gonna make that game or anything like that. If any game has reflex low latency and it's not and it's a competitive game, always turn it on. It makes it so you can respond faster to everything. In single player games, unless you notice a latency, I would always recommend keeping it off. Because typically, at least in my experience, sometimes issues happen because of it. I don't know why. It shouldn't change anything. But sometimes you just get some weird stutter or weird lag or something because of it. So I don't know why that is, but I would typically keep it off unless I feel like I need more. Unless I feel a latency from when I click a button to something appearing on screen. Hopefully you know what I mean. So yeah, it can be useful for that kind of stuff. I don't know if it affects VSync at all, which I'm going to talk about next. But if you really feel like you click a button and it doesn't happen immediately and it goes like a second or like 0.2 seconds until it happens in the game and you're like, wow, I got hit now because I clicked a button and it didn't respond in game until like a little while later, then turn this on and it should fix your issues. But if it introduces stutter, try to turn it off again. Next up, we got VSync, which, as it says up there, enabling vertical sync will force your graphics card to operate at a rate no higher than the monitor's refresh rate. Or before I do this, actually, frame generation is exclusive to the 40 series graphics cards of NVIDIA. Just so you're aware of that. It's an NVIDIA specific thing, and it's only for the 4000 series of cards that have built-in support for frame generation. So yeah, it's that's how it works pretty much. So it's an NVIDIA specific thing. AMD is working on their version of it, but right now it's an like NVIDIA specific thing. I can't talk for some reason, or well, whoopsie. So yeah, if you have an AMD card or you have a previous gen NVIDIA card or anything below 4000 series, you cannot activate it anyway. I still explained what it does in case you want to get one or if you have one. But you don't need to worry about it if you don't. You can play the game without it. So next up we have VSync, again, which is called vertical sync. In the past, I used to refer to it as a visual sync for some weird reason. So a little fun fact about me. But anyway, VSync makes it so, whoops, so your actual FPS is capped to your monitor's refresh rate. Now, if you don't know what your monitor's refresh rate is, I would highly recommend going ahead and figuring that out before you continue watching the whole guide here. The way you do that is either go into your actual control panel of whatever you use on your screen slash PC and just look at the refresh rate the actual screen has. It's just that like somewhere in the whole driver of the PC. If you don't know what your actual frame rate is, or your refresh rate is, you can always just enable VSync, go into the game, and if you have a 60 refresh rate, typically your FPS will be 60, and you'll have a huge input lag. I would never recommend turning VSync on unless you don't understand or know how to use an FPS limiter to limit it below your refresh rate. But besides that, I would say just, I mean, it's up to you whether you want to turn on VSync or not, but I would recommend not turning it on and just kind of limiting your FPS instead. But if you want to turn VSync on, you can. It's not the end of the world. It's just going to give you some input delay. And then I would also, again, recommend enabling reflex low latency. I don't know if it affects VSync in any way, but I mean, it must to some extent, right? But like all these three, enable frame generation of VSync, always turn on reflex low latency unless the stock has started and turn it off. Again, I would not recommend using VSync. And here we have which I said, by the way, a frame rate limit cap. This limits the frame rate you can have in-game. And it's very long, by the way. 360 FPS? Who the heck is going to get 360 FPS in this game? Which is a nice little overkill setting, I guess. But you can either run uncapped, you can run 360. Multiples of 60 is the best way to do it. I say, because, you know, multiples of 60 means that you're going to get the smoothest if you record anyway. It means it's going to be 2-to-1 if you downscale to 60 FPS. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't know why I'm saying that. It has no relevance to you anyway. If you plan on recording the games, but multiples of 60 is good. But if you just want to play for fun, I mean, you can cap it at whatever you want. Best place to cap it is somewhat below your unstable frame rate. Let's say your frame rate fluctuates from 70 to 90, and it keeps going down to 70, then 90, then 70, 90. Putting an FPS cap at 75 or something would actually be a great idea, because then your FPS get limited to 75 all the time, and you will never dip below 75. Maybe at some points when it needs to load something. But then you mostly have an expected and stable experience playing the game. Frame rate limiters, or frame rate caps, as some call them, are very useful for playing games. But some people prefer to not use them. Typically, you also don't get your money's worth if you use them, which is kind of a whole other topic. But I always use a frame rate limiter, and I limit mine to always have 120 FPS, because I don't need anything above that. I'm happy with 120 FPS in every single game. But if you want the max frame rate possible, you leave this as uncapped. Again, it's completely up to you what you want. If you want a more stable frame rate, then select something right below where the frame rate fluctuates like crazy. For me, again, 120 is probably the best. But I'm going to keep it uncapped because I have another program to use for that. So if you want to, I would recommend, instead of using VSync, you use the frame rate cap, the frame rate limit. It says may reduce stuttering, but it 100% will reduce stuttering if you use a frame rate limiter, no matter what situation. At least, it maybe not stuttering specifically, but it reduces those feels you get after the frame rate drops and goes up again and down and up. I don't know if that can be considered stuttering, but anyway. Next up, we have HDR. Very unique setting, depends entirely on your screen, by the way. HDR makes darkers look more dark, and as far as I know, makes bright look more bright. It makes everything look a little bit more cinematic, if you get what I mean. It makes everything look a little bit more contrasty. It's completely up to you whether you want to use HDR or not. Again, it's a preference thing. So, want to use HDR, you can use HDR, or if you want to not use it, you don't have to use it. If the settings grayed out, it just means your monitor doesn't support it, so there's no reason to panic. It's not a game-breaking thing anyway, but it will make the game look slightly better. on your side anyway. So up to you whether you want to use it. Image calibration you use to like just determine exactly how you want HDR to be. I can show you really fast. It's literally just this. Adjust the slider until the image is barely visible. I don't know if you guys can see it on your screens, depending on like what your screen settings are. But down here we have a Hogwarts, like in the middle here we have a Hogwarts logo. You just kind of do it until you can see the outline of the symbol. And that way you get the best possible brightness for your game and makes everything look as it's supposed to look in the game. Because sometimes your screen's brightness is too little and sometimes it's too high. This is kind of just to adjust it so you get the best possible experience. And as you can see, mine is actually a little bit too dark. So I actually had to up mine a little bit. But yeah, until you see the outline here on your screen, I would... that's kind of when you stop, when you see the outline. If you don't, then you just keep pushing it this way until you see it. It doesn't have to be completely visible. Like it says, if it's barely visible, as long as you can make out what it looks like, that's when you stop. I have already spent 40 minutes in this video. Oh boy. Just so you know, this is my first video of this kind. So if I'm making mistakes here and there and I do hiccups now and again, it happens. I'm doing my best to kind of explain so everyone understands, but I might cut and do stuff in between. We'll see what I decide to do in editing. But I'm still trying to do my best here to explain and show and stuff like that. So hopefully that's okay with you guys. So next up we have field of view. I recommend the field of view to not be touched, if I have to be completely honest. It depends entirely on your preference, again. It's a preference setting. Do you like it when the camera is very far away from your character? Do you like it when it's closer to your character? That's kind of what this means. The more this way it goes, the farther away from your character it's going to be. And this way it's going to be closer to your character. I always leave it at default, because that's typically how the game is meant to be played. But again, it's a preference setting. It's like a luxurious setting, you know. If you prefer it to be further away from your character, then do that. If you prefer it to be closer to the character, then you do that. It's a third-person game, so the field of view is not that important. Again, default is rather nice, I think, in my opinion. So it doesn't matter too much. First-person games is a whole other story, but that's fine. Now, we have these settings, which are, in my opinion, the most annoying settings in any game that are defaulted always on. But let's start with motion blur. It is pretty much what it says. It blurs motion when the camera moves, or from objects that moves really fast. It gives you the sense of something moving extremely fast, so your eyes can't catch it. Now, there are arguments as to why exactly people put motion blur in their games. Because in general, it makes the game look worse. But it can also make everything look like it moves faster. Like it's a unique setting that I would always recommend turning off. For two reasons. One thing is it makes everything look better. And two, it actually makes it so you use less, like you lose performance when you have it on. I don't know how else to explain it. So let's say you turn it on, you look at moving objects and everything looks worse. And then you also have 2 less FPS for some reason with it on, and then you turn it off and everything looks better and you get more FPS. It's like, why the heck is this a setting in any game? It depends. If everything loads in slow around you, there's an argument to be made that you won't really notice it with motion blur. But typically you should have it off to kind of, like it says, impact CPU performance. Are you really willing to make everything look worse just because you want it to look faster? And at the same time also lose CPU performance because you want it on. Like, it's such a stupid setting. Again, if you don't notice it, it's not a big deal, but you still turn it off just because you get more FPS with it off. Slightly more, but still more. Next up we have depth of field. What you might understand is a camera effect from a camera, if you ever used a camera before. It focuses on an object or person in front of it and blurs out everything else. Depending on the game, this can look good and it can look bad. But the way games implement it makes it always look kind of horrible. And typically you want to look at everything around you and your character at the same time, not just one of each. So I always recommend turning it off Again, it impacts CPU performance. Again, you're getting performance by turning it off, and you're getting a better game experience. Now, if you're the kind of person that does like the whole cinematic effect of your character being the centerpiece and your background being blurred while they talk and is zoomed in on them, then you can turn it on. See how it is on your game. Maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. Completely up to you. Whether or not you want it on or off. It's completely up to you whether you want it on or off. But I would strongly recommend turning it off. Next up, we have chromatic aberration. This one I can actually argue for at times. Because the way chromatic aberration works is it introduces some kind of weird color fringe. It's weird to say because it makes the edges of your screen kind of get more pink and blue. So it gets this whole cyberpunk feel to it. But that's also kind of where it ends, because you only want it to happen in kind of cyborg, like retro futuristic settings, where blue and red and blue and pink are pretty much the main colors of the HUD on your screen or something. It does not fit in any other game, in my opinion, and it should not be part of any other game. Again, I would highly recommend you disable it unless you have like mechanical things always around you and you are looking through a visor or something. Again, this is a Hogwarts magic game, third person, makes no sense to have chromatic aberration. I would not recommend enabling it. Again, you can try it out for yourself if you want, see exactly if you care about it or not. It's barely noticeable, so if you really want it on, you can. But it won't really add to your experience, especially in this game. So it's something I always recommend turning off. The next one is the most weird setting that I've ever seen in a video game before. I've seen it in multiple games, by the way. Don't get me, this is not the first. But it's called film grain. So you know how in old films you have this weird grain on the screen that makes things look, I don't know, a little bit more cinematic in a weird way. It adds like small dots that sometimes pop up. You know, like if you're watching an old television, and it kind of adds this weird little aesthetic effect to it. It's very hard to explain, but it looks like very tiny grain that kind of just keeps like going on the screen in specific spots. All the explanation, I know, but I can't really do much else about it. It only worsens the image. Unless you love old televisions, turn it off. There's no point to it. It's the worst setting. It's not the worst. It's not as bad as motion blur, but it's the second worst setting I've ever seen in a game. It's arguably worse than depth of field, in my opinion, because it only worsens the image. And while it may add a movie effect to it, but that's only if you associate it with movies. But it's a video game, and you look and control the character. So why would you want more? Why would you want more like weird dots on the screen? This is a weird setting in general. I would recommend turning it off, like I already have here. And the last setting is select GPU. It's not really a setting per se. It's just a GPU select. If you have multiple GPUs in your system, let's say you have an Intel graphics card and you have an NVIDIA graphics card, select the GPU you want to use for the game. Just note that this also changes upscale type. So if you select NVIDIA DLSS and you change it to the Intel graphics card, you cannot use DLSS anymore. So yeah, I don't think that's something you want. Now I'm actually going to change this to the settings I recommended for you guys, and then I'm going to move on to the actual other settings. The settings that actually change how things in game look, specifically, not in general, but specifically. This is what I recommended. Then I went 0.4 sharpness, then off with that, off with VSync, frame rate. Typically, I would cap it at 120 if I were you. 120, you don't really need more than that. Typically, you don't hit higher than that anyway. This is the kind of the sweet spot for me. If you have like 70 FPS and you keep it down to 60, that's limited at 60. If you have an FPS at 90 and it keeps from down to like 70, try to limit it at 80. Just kind of try to find a balance for you there. Again, up here we have windowed full screen, we have AOC, we have our resolution here, which is 2560 by 1440. It can be 1080p for you. or it can be 4K for you if that's what you want. Rendering resolution is the resolution that FSR2 or DLSS or XESS controls, and it kind of determines how much it needs to upscale up to your actual resolution on the screen. Anti-aliasing mode should be grayed out unless you don't want to use upscaling. Again, completely up to you. Upscale type, depending on your graphics card, can be changed to different things. Also, determine on that. Upscaling mode. Again, I went with balance because I cannot see a difference between quality and balance in the game. Again, completely dependent on who you are as a person and what you consider a good-looking screen and an image. Upscale sharpness to 0.4 because I enjoy the sharpness on top of the upscaling that it brings to make the image pop a little bit more. Frame generation off because I can't turn it on. Otherwise, I would probably try it on first, and then if I don't like it, I'll turn it off. Frame rate, again, 120 or whatever you want to stabilize your FPS at. Image calibration, already explained that one. Field of view, preference, all of these off. Turn them on if you want to check them out. And then, of course, just the TPU you actually want the game to use to actually play. Now, those are the display options. So hopefully I helped you guys out with this set of settings. Now I'm going to jump down to the actual game settings. But with these settings already, you should probably have seen a boost to your performance. Or at least you hopefully get the image quality of the game you want in general. Now you just need to match the next settings with these settings to get the optimized game that you want for yourself. Now, before we go ahead and actually try to do these settings, I'm going to go ahead and say that I probably said this before, but I'm going to say this now. You yourself need to set the limit to what FPS you want. My FPS limit is 60. That is where I say my minimum FPS is supposed to be. And that's the FPS I constantly want most of the time. It has to be at least a minimum 60 FPS for me to want to play it properly. And then for me to try to lower these settings accordingly to at least get 60 FPS. And now you can try to set your limit and say, I only want 120 FPS all the time. Then go with that. Depending on the kind of person you are. Like, there are two kinds of people, as far as I understand. Two kinds of people. There's one that's like, I want the best image quality possible, and I don't care too much about FPS. And then there's one that is, I care about FPS only, I don't care about the image quality. And both of them are completely fine ways of looking at it. I'm kind of in the middle myself. I don't care too much about image quality, but also don't want a very horrible FPS experience. So you just figure out which kind of person you are, and depending on that, these two things I might explain now might make sense to you in what you want to do and what you don't want to do. So let's start with graphics options here. Again, that also counts for this, by the way, in case you want to change these. Again, are you the person that wants the best image? Then you need to turn this up to quality or turn it off entirely. Or do you want performance? Then you can turn it down to as much as you want, technically. Like I said, I'm in the middle, so I like the image to look good and also perform pretty okay. But again, if you don't care about looks, just turn ultra performance on and see how that goes. And then if it really bothers you, then just go up. Otherwise, you just go down if you're the other kind of person. But again, now for the actual settings. So, global quality preset. Do not pick the recommended. Now, I know that games have the tendency to like look at your hardware and be like, oh wow, I see you have this hardware, you should use this setting. And typically, you can play with those settings, but it's not going to be stable. I always recommend selecting, again, Ultra if you want the best image quality, or Low if you want the best FPS. Let's say I want the best FPS, right? I pick low settings. I then apply the settings, and I'm like, wow, okay. Now, how does the game look to me? How do I see the game? Does the game look good still? Honestly, it looks pretty okay to me. Okay. Anyway, now I have kept my FPS at 120. I get constant 120 FPS right now. game looks pretty okay. I don't really have any issues with it. It looks fairly okay. I'm getting a very stable FPS, never goes below 120 FPS. Game still looks pretty okay, honestly. I actually expected it to look worse. I've never tried the low settings before. But yeah, very, very low settings. Everything looks pretty good still, I would say. Balanced AMD FSR2 still. Looks fairly good. No complaints, actually. So if I was the kind of person that just wanted the best performance in this game, honestly, I would put it to low. That's my honest opinion. If I was playing this game for fun and I wasn't recording, I'd probably put it to low. Because this is buttery smooth, by the way. So very smooth. Don't notice any lagging whatsoever. So this is the kind of thing you should do if you are the kind of I want the best FPS kind of person, and I don't care about the looks of the game too much. Although this is kind of a good middle ground in all honesty. Now, let's say you're the kind of person who's the opposite of that. I want the best quality whatsoever, and I only want 30 FPS. Let's say that, right? Then put everything to ultra. You go out, look at the game again. Everything is now ultra. You can see how everything is starting to load in. FPS dropped immensely. Now I'm actually below 120 FPS. I'm at 100 FPS. I honestly barely notice a difference, but that's just me. Now I notice a few stutters here and there, but now my game looks very good. So you need to tell yourself, am I okay with this stutter? Or should I do my best to lower them even further? Again, you do the same thing. You open up the settings, you go in here. You go in here, you select... Did I pick recommended? I don't think I picked recommended. Oh, I guess it's because ultra is recommended for me. So, yeah. Now, if you were the kind of person that was like, oh, low is too ugly for me, then put it to medium. If low is too bad for you, then put it to medium. See? Oh, okay. Does this look better for you? Oh, yeah, it looks slightly better than low. Actually, now I like it more than low anyway. So I think this is fine for me. Then, again, that's fine for you. And now you can play it at low. So that's very good. Nice. You found the perfect setup for you. And then let's say you play with it for a bit and you're like, oh, wow, I don't like how that specific thing looks. I don't like how the LOD is so visible. Then you open up the settings again and you change the LOD for the game. If there is one anyway. I guess it's view distance. That must be LOD. Now I'll explain it a little bit, but anyway, that's just an example of how you use a quality preset, because a lot of people just kind of use it wrong. They kind of just set it to ultra and say, okay, now I'm done. But again, that only works if you're the kind of person that want the best image quality and just don't care about having a very smooth playable experience, but you want everything to look very gorgeous, you know? You like the visual candy, so to speak. While some other people just like to have a very playable experience. So, just saying, by the way, it depends also on how you look at the money you wasted on the game. If you wasted a heck ton of money on the game, is the gameplay experience more worth it to you? Or is the image quality more worth it to you? Very important to pick between the two. Anyway, let's say I play Ultra, and you know what? I get a nice looking game. But it also seems like my performance is not good enough. No, I keep stuttering, I keep lagging. It is not actually as good as I want it to be. So what do you do then? Do you just lower it to high? I mean, technically, yes, and also no. It depends entirely on if you feel like this is the perfect preset for you. So let's say you really like Ultra, and you only have minor gripes with things on Ultra, and you know that a specific setting that really hurts you when you play the game. Then you just lower the setting that you think sucks, like shadows as an example. You lower it, boom, now you go into the game. Now it's high, not ultra. And you just gain the performance boost. And everything still looks the same, and this just looks slightly worse. That is the kind of mentality you need to get if you go into, or you need to have if you go into a game and you want to change the settings and customize it. Now, before I continue with explaining what these settings are, hopefully I have done a decent job at explaining the actual presets and what they should mean to you, depending on the type of person you are. I'll talk about effects, material, fog quality, all that stuff now. All right, just so everyone can get the same kind of idea of how it works. So first of all, effects. Effects is typically the particles you see in the game. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you want to see cool effects, right? There you go. Here's an effect. When I hit the ground, I get an effect on the ground. I also see effects on my wand. Also, the particles around my wand and everything are also an effect. How good do you want that to be? A little secret between you and me, I don't see a difference between the lowest effect and the highest. It's not really something you focus on. I guess the water on the cape now is technically also an effect. As far as I know anyway. I don't know what this game counts as effects technically. But the raindrops you see in the outfit right now are technically also effects. So if I lower this, let's actually try it out. Let's see if I lower the effects now. If I can find it, here we go. I'll put that to low. I think there are less raindrops, but it's very hard to like notice. Honestly, I don't see a difference. I just think I see less particles. I don't think I really see a lesser quality of particles. But now I have less effects in the game. Like the effects are very simple. It is this book too. This is an effect. By the way, the trail here is an effect. Honestly, you'll barely see a visual quality difference. So if you really just want better performance, you can put this on low if you want. But anyway, that's effects for you. The cool little lighty things that happen in the game. That's the best way I have to say. Typically, there are very flashy things in the game. Of course, it can also be dirt you run on where you leave a trail or something like that, you know. Typically, they're both CPU and GPU performance heavy, but that depends entirely on like how big the effects are and how bad they are. Again, I don't really notice a difference, so I like to put it on. Like, I would have put it if you really want to optimize the game. No, I'll put this on medium. Okay, I'm gonna go down to every single setting I would recommend for you if you just want the best experience. Effects, I would put on medium. Then we have material quality, which is hard to explain without showing you. So as far as I know, material quality shows the actual materials in the game. And by materials, I'm guessing the game means this. You see how this cliff looks pretty 3D? I don't actually know if it also counts the clothes, but I guess we'll see about that. So let's see how this rock here looks pretty 3D. It looks not the best looking rock in the world actually, but you know, it's a rock. And it looks like a rock. And if I go down in here and I actually turn off material, not turn off, but turn it to low, you should be able to see a difference in the rock texture. I don't see a difference. I guess I see slightly worse. It's more flat, slightly more flat. The texture itself, or the material. It could also be the clothes again. It could also be the crown here. Although it looks kind of good. I don't know. I really don't know. The difference between the ultra preset and the lowest preset in this game is kind of small. We can already see I'm having some visual issues over there with the view distance, I think. Don't know why that happens. It's just the game being weird. But anyway, materials could also be the clothing or stuff like that. Now, again, I would urge you to experiment with yourself because it's kind of hard to figure out what the game specifically means when they say effects. I think that's the hardest part of making a video like this. You don't technically know what they mean by material. Except maybe it's a rock, maybe it's silver, maybe it's, you know, depending on what it's made out of, it looks like that. But again, I would guess they meant clothes or the cliff faces or something to make it look more like an actual cliff, make the clothes look more like cloth or wool. So that's what I am assuming it means. So depending on if you can see a difference or not, you should put that at whatever you want to put it at. Again, I would put that at medium because, again, I don't see a difference. So why would I put it at high? Now we have fog. Fog is another one of those very funky settings that people like to mess with or hate on and kind of remove from the game. Depending on who you are and what you want. You can put it to ultra, you can put it to low. Fog in games typically eat a lot of performance, but don't really look different. So again, I'll put the fog to low, so we can try to see the difference in the game. I'm guessing this would have an effect on distant fog. But again, I don't see a difference whatsoever in the fog. Now, this may be more visible in a place like the Forbidden Forest, technically. So let's just quickly go down there. Anyway, here we have some fog. So let's see. This is fog. I actually see a difference now. That is horrible fog. Wrong setting, by the way. Whoops. So we have the fog here. Let's put it to medium. Let's see if that changes anything. Nope, still looks kind of horrible. Now, this is one of those situations where it might not actually be the fog setting itself that's messing it up. Try to put it to ultra just to see if it actually is the fog setting itself. Yeah, I don't think it's the fog setting itself. Okay, so actually it also seems to be light. So what you can see here is, I think, artifacting from FSR 2. Let's just see if that is the case. No, it is not. Okay, I think I just found a visual bug in the game. Either that or it's supposed to look like that. So yeah, that's the thing in the game, apparently. But if we do take a look at fog... Oh, well, we're down here now. Okay, anyway, we are now here. So how nice, isn't it? Before we were up there, now we're down here. Okay, so where were we? Sorry about that little distraction. So that was fog, and again, I didn't notice a difference besides the little bug, so I'll just put it at medium. Like, medium is a very good place to just put something. If you're like, I don't notice a difference in it, so just put it to medium. Low is the best option for you if you want the best performance. But chances are, sometimes when you put things to low, you end up finding them more visible. And then you're like, okay, I'll put this to high now. And now you're up high. And then you're like, okay, now I have worse performance. So medium is kind of the one you go to. If you see a thing, like if you don't see a change between like high and low, you kind of just go to medium. That way you make sure, at least if you encounter it more, you barely see a difference, if you know what I mean. So I think that is the best kind of way to do it. So next up we have clouds. You see the clouds up there? They are volumetric clouds, which means that they actually look thick and very like woolly, I guess you can say. And if you want to lessen those clouds, there we go, and make them look more like 2D textures, depending on what you think 2D textures look like. You can make them look more flat and 2D textury. You see how they went from being like big, very woolly detailed to just being like very blurry, like 2D things. That's the sky detail. Now at this one I do notice, but you also notice really fast that if I go in here and I just put this to medium, didn't improve at all. Okay, let's try to put it to the max setting, or to the ultra setting. I mean, it looks better, but still slightly blurry. So this is kind of what you need to do in order to, you know, optimize yourself. But based on what I can see, there is a little bit of a difference in the how do you say it? The thickness and the detail in the clouds. in the sky, so to speak, but like overall, I don't see a big difference. So again, this one I didn't notice though, and because I noticed it, I'll actually go ahead and put it to high. Next up, we got foliage quality. This one I'm definitely gonna notice. Foliage quality in games is typically one of the most demanding, but also one of the most noticeable settings that you can possibly like get. So you see all this grass here now, right? There are a lot of grass. There's a lot of these yellow bushes here, or whatever you want to call them. A lot of tree leaves and everything. Down there you see all this grass. Makes everything look more alive. That's what foliage does. All the grass and everything like that is gonna go completely because it's gonna be gone now. Because I turned this setting all the way down to low. Okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was gonna be. But a lot of it is gone. Actually, I don't see a difference. Why don't I see a difference? Huh. Okay, I don't really see a difference. But typically what the foliage thing does, or a foliage setting does, is it lowers the amount of small grass patches you see down there. You see there's 1, 2, 3, you know, all of those small areas. All of them get lowered to to a lesser amount. So you still see them, they're still there, but there are way, way less of them. And I think that is the case here. It's just really barely visible. Let's just look here for now. And then let's go ahead and actually go and do this again and just kind of try to put it to ultra. Do we get more grass now? Yes, we do. We definitely do. So that is kind of how you manage this. Now, actually, I didn't really notice a difference between low and ultra. But as soon as I turn it to ultra, again, sometimes it has to go from low to ultra to see the difference. Or from ultra to low. I would try both if I were you to see what works best for you. And yeah, you kind of just have the... Like I said, this grass setting itself, I don't really notice a big difference. Or actually, I do notice it, but to me, it's not a big deal. Because foliage is okay, but I don't really care too much about it. Like, even low, it still has quite a bit. So to me, this setting is fine. You see how there's way less now? But at the same time, it still looks like there is foliage. It does look like though, like the issue with this is it tends to look like there's like a big gap between every single piece of it. And again, that's completely fine for me personally. But if you are the one that gets put off by it quite a lot, I would highly recommend upping this setting. Again, I would put this at medium, maybe high if it really means a lot to you. But ultra just seems like overkill to me. So I put it at medium because that's what I think works best for me. So post-process quality. Technically, this setting doesn't matter too much if you followed my earlier steps. Unless somehow it bugs out and they still work. But just in case that happens, just put post-process quality to ultra. If you actually have these on down here, like all of these four, if you have any of these on, then take post-process quality and put it to low. And if you really don't like, if you're really scared that this might take more performance from you, just always put it to low. Don't even put it to high. All this one does is just make everything like lens flares, depth of field, lens flares. I don't think you can actually turn off, but you know, you should barely see lens flares in this game. But like depth of field, motion blur, all that stuff. Typically, I would recommend putting this to low all the time in every single game if you can. But in this game, definitely put it to low. Unless, again, you like lens flares, which you can't turn off for some reason, and you'll see lens flares looking like it looks awful, then turn it to either medium or high or whatever you want to put it to. But besides that, I would always recommend just putting it to low, because, like, how would you notice lens flares? Like, this is not a shooting game. What material do you have, or how often do you look into the sun in a game like this? That's third person and everything. But again, depends entirely on you. Want it to be low, high, medium, ultra, whatever you want, I guess. Next up, we have shadow quality, which is always, and I pretty much mean always, one of the best settings to turn off in any game. Not off, but like down in any game. So Ultra impacts GPU performance quite a bit, all the time. If your graphics card is being maxed out, lowering this setting can like improve it by 10% or maybe 20% in very rare cases, although I think they're more optimized nowadays to shadows. So turning down the shadow setting really, really helps, and it's also one of the most noticeable settings. So let's take Ultra as an example. You see my shadow here. It looks very, very soft, and now it actually looks like a hard shadow. You can kind of see that the edge looks very rounded. It looks very smooth. The transition between like there being a shadow and there not being a shadow. Also, if I can find something else using it as an example. Okay, I can't. Anyway, you can also see that the shadow kind of looks defined and everything. And then if you turn this down to low. By the way, when you're testing this, I would highly recommend that you turn off the FPS limiter. Just so you guys are aware. So shadow quality, let's put it to low. And then apply. It still looks pretty defined, but it looks way less obvious. It looks way less like clean. Very playable though. It still doesn't have the issue that I see a lot of low shadows have actually. It looks surprisingly good. I don't know why this looks good. It's not supposed to. It does look slightly worse than the other one though. It looks less dark and more like the edges look more blended into the ground. But overall, it still looks like a pretty good shadow. Which is kind of weird. And no, I don't think my settings are bugged out, because they do work. Because I have seen the changes and everything. And you can see again, it's more more clean, so to speak. It is less like weird of an edge. It's more contrasty on the edge, I would say, when you have the highest setting on compared to the lowest one. But I also think that's like the only difference. So because of the shadows being so demanding as they are, and it just doesn't have the weird artifact issue with shadows. So in some games, shadows have weird artifacts on the edges of them. Like let's say that you have a shadow that you turn from ultra to low. Typically, this shadow would get very jagged edges, and it would look completely horrible. It would look, it would like phase in and out of existence. You can see the shadow kind of being like 10 FPS sometimes, kind of just having light between it. Especially trees is kind of where the lower shadow quality kind of goes in and hurts. And this game, medium shadows is actually a pretty decent thing. Again, the difference between ultra and low in this game is so like small that it doesn't really matter. You can even see here that the shadows look completely fine. Although there is some artifacting going on with these shadows. You notice how when they move, you can kind of see a little bit of a flicker at the edge of the shadow. Like, kind of like they are jumping a little bit around. That is an artifact caused by the lower shadow thing. So if you really don't like that, and you focus a lot on shadows, trees are like the best ways of testing this, by the way, because that's typically like where the shadows are worse. Then I would highly recommend that you up the shadow quality, but for me this is fine. Like, I'm not gonna look at the ground and stare at the shadows. Like, I'll run around like this, look at the distance and look over here and see how things look over there, and then look at trees specifically and not at the shadows and stuff like that. The shadow here also looks fine to me, although it does look a little bit blurred out on the edges compared to the ultra one. But it looks completely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Again, it looks completely fine to me. So based on that logic, I would say that the shadows in this game look kind of good in general, no matter what setting you have. Kind of funky in my opinion, but yeah. So again, I recommend the shadow quality to actually be medium if you want the highest FPS possible. Then we have texture quality. Now, this is arguably... Actually, no, it's not even arguably the most important one. This is the most important setting in the graphics options in any game, specifically this game, because of VRAM and GPU performance. Textures are the worst on your graphics card, and it's also the worst on your VRAM. So especially now, this game's VRAM can take up to 12. Like on ultra settings, it can take maybe even 14 VRAM, depending on the leak. It's pretty much the graphics card memory, that's VRAM. You'll see it later when I actually test the game, how it kind of jumps up. But when it comes to texture quality, for the people with less than 8 gigabytes of VRAM, I would recommend putting it to medium. For the people with 10/12, just to be safe, I would put it on high. And for the people with 16 VRAM, I would put it on ultra. I can show you the difference in a bit in texture quality itself. But the issue I have with texture quality, especially when it comes to VRAM and stuff in this game, is that there's a VRAM leak somewhere. For me, for some reason, there's one for me. My friend who has the game running perfectly in the same hardware doesn't have the VRAM leak for some reason. But anyway, he plays the game at high 4K, I think, or ultra 4K, and he can play it for hours on end. Every 40 minutes after I've started the game and I play on high settings texture quality. On apply, yeah, just enable them anyway. Every single time I enable, like, let's say high quality settings here, high textures, and I go in the game and I play for 40 minutes in this game, I get horrible stutters because my VRAM limit is reached. I have 10 gigabytes VRAM, graphics card memory, in my graphics card. And I should not be getting that unless there's a build up of VRAM that the game just doesn't get rid of. It's very weird because it's a specific game thing to this specific game where the VRAM limit keeps, like, the VRAM keeps increasing in the game for me personally for some reason. Not for my friend. Again, completely the same, pretty much the same PC. Not completely, but pretty much the same PC, and he does not have this issue. So if you have the issue, you have to restart the game every 40 minutes, and then you can play. Again, this is a nightmare with this sharpness setting not actually taking effect and saving every single time you restart the game. And at the same time, it introduces stutter, and you just can't keep playing no matter what you do with your settings. This is a serious issue with the game, and one of the reasons why I wish the developers would not just have abandoned it as soon as they sold. Also unacceptable for a game that is supposed to improve and help out, or a game that costs a lot. This game is way too expensive for all the problems it has, in my honest opinion. But again, I recommend putting this to high again if you have 12 and 10, and medium if you have 8, and low if you still get stutter even though you have 8. This is one of those settings where you're forced to lower it if your graphics card's VRAM just cannot keep the limit in it, and you start getting stuttering. This is the only setting in the game that can pretty much make the game unplayable no matter what FPS you get in the game. So this is the most delicate setting, and this is the safest one to put on medium, just to avoid any problems you might have. So I'm going to put it on medium, because we're doing the optimized settings. We're not just doing the settings that would make the game look best. Just the most optimized settings. View distance quality. This one is a preferable one. Whatever you prefer is the one you should pick. So to do this, I'm actually going to overlook... I'm actually going to head and overlook Hogwarts here. And the people down there you see walking. Okay, so let's take a look at Hogwarts. You see how you can see the detail up there. You can see the towers. You can see some windows. Everything's a little bit foggy, but, it's okay. Not the worst thing in the world. Then you go to settings. Go here. You take the view distance and put it to low. And now, let's take a look again. You can see that things have lost a bit of detail in the distance. The castle doesn't look as clear anymore. But in all honesty, it doesn't look horrible. You can kind of see that this over there kind of lost all its roundness and became very jagged. You can also see that this now became less detailed, but it is still quite detailed. So the view distance to low is not horrible, and it helps your performance quite a bit. But I also feel like it takes some aesthetic purpose away from the game. Where the game looks like it looks less aesthetic. Wait, why is the texture quality at? I accidentally forgot to apply it, I think. But the view distance, I would actually recommend either on high or medium to get the right experience from the game. As you can see now, this is more defined textures. That over there doesn't look as jagged anymore. Putting it too high really improved things quite a bit. But it also hurt my performance a bit, I can feel. So, again, whatever you prefer. Again, I think the aesthetic of the game kind of requires it to be high, because the whole selling point of the game is that you are at the landscape of Hogwarts, you know? And you're here to see how everything works. Again, this also affects VRAM. So this is also a good setting to lower in case you have VRAM issues. So high or medium, very recommended. I don't think I should ever recommend Ultra on this one. Next up we have population density. Now that depends entirely on your CPU. If you have a more modern CPU, putting this on Ultra shouldn't affect you much. In all honesty, if you have a very old CPU, like a very old CPU, that can't really keep up with the game, then putting it to low is the best bet for you. It won't really do anything crazy to the world around you. Like, if you put it to low, all I think it does is it lessens the people, and it makes the people you see wear less detailed clothes and have less detailed things on them. This is how it works in most games. So turning this down to low just means that you don't really lose out on much. So it really helps out your CPU quite a bit. But because this game doesn't actually utilize CPU properly, you still... it shouldn't be a big problem. But if you have a very old CPU, put it to low. If you have a fairly new CPU, you can put it on Ultra if it's a very beast CPU. But if you just want the best kind of optimized settings, putting it to either high or medium is the best option for you. But putting it to high if it's fairly new and it just works for you and the CPU is completely fine with it, then just put it to high. See how much the CPU works in the game. And then you have the run benchmark, by the way. This is a very horrible benchmark setting. It's not actually a benchmark. It just takes whatever settings it thinks would work for you and put them in there. Let's just say that when I clicked this and I got my settings, it didn't really work for me. So don't click this. Don't touch it. Just leave it be. When it comes to ray tracing, in this game specifically, turn it all off. Ray tracing in this game is currently broken, and if you enable ray tracing, it doesn't work. It's completely broken, and it like looks weird. It makes the game look wrong and weird. And yeah, it's just broken. There's nothing much to do about it. It is broken. So I think you can find some mods online that fixes that. But the developers, like I said, haven't updated the game for a long time and have not fixed this issue as of this recording. So yeah, and there's not much to be said about it. They kind of just abandoned the game, and ray tracing is broken. So if you turn it on, you just lose performance for no reason, and then you get weird visual artifacts. So you shouldn't mess with that. But if they ever fix it, turning ray tracing on, I would recommend only turning on reflections if they fix ray tracing. If you want to see the broken ray traced elements, you can, I guess. Turn on ray tracing, go into Hogwarts, look around, see the visual bugs with it, and then turn it off again and restart the game. It's one of those settings you have to restart the game to actually apply. But I would 100% recommend just leaving them off. And if you were to turn any of them on, turn on ray trace reflections. turn off the other two ray trace thingies and turn the ray tracing quality to high. I think there are, how many settings are there? Let me just see. We have ultra, high, and medium and low. If you want the best performance and you still want ray tracing, you can put it to low. If you want the best ray tracing, again, it depends on the kind of person you are. If you just want ray tracing, actually no, it doesn't. If you really want to use ray tracing with the best quality and you want the best FPS too, just go from ultra and down. Because if you're really the kind of person that would more FPS, you don't want ray tracing on. Trust me. So yeah, that's that. Now these are the last graphics options. These are not something you have to pick. Again, I hope you yourself have tried to like understand these settings and what they actually do. So this is completely tailored to my own personal experience. Like I said, most of the medium settings for me doesn't look that much different from the ultra settings. And the ones that do, I have put to high. As an example, sky quality, the view distance quality, and population quality. Because I have a pretty decent CPU. So all of these things to me look completely fine and seems to work. And if I take a look at the game, this is how the game looks like with everything on. I'm getting pretty good amount of FPS. So let me just give you guys an example. So let me turn off the FPS limiter. Again, use the limiter if you want. It's not something you have to use. Although it would make you get a more stable FPS. I turn off my FPS limiter. I'm getting 115 FPS right now. 124, 118. And I keep jumping down. I'll give you guys a little benchmark or a little showcase later on. 130 FPS if it's still in look. Still, I guess. So here would probably be beneficial for me to use a 110 FPS limiter, because I do jump down below 120 now and again. So that would be beneficial for me. Even 100 FPS limiter would probably be a good idea. Depending on, again, how your FPS jumps with these settings. But that is not the end of it, though. Oh, and again, I have a 3080 10 gigabyte, in case you're wondering once again about what exactly my my settings for my how my FPS gets affected or whatever. Like you can minus the percentage from your graphics card. You can just try this out in your game, which I would, again, highly recommend you do. But if you copy paste my settings, then do expect to get worse performance than me. So below 120 FPS with these settings. Depends, of course, on your CPU. This game is very special. I'll come to that later, whenever I do the graphics comparisons and the CPU stuff. This game doesn't actually utilize the CPU properly, and your CPU is most likely going to be the bottleneck anyway. Which means you can probably also turn off upscaling, but that's another thing entirely. Anyway, audio options. Again, I said I'll go through all the options, and I do still think that would be a great idea. Because I've already seen anyone talk about audio options, and then I'm going to talk about utilities and stuff like that. So this is going to be a bit faster, because these options are really straightforward. Music volume, how loud the music is. Typically, I like to turn this down to 30, 40, or 50. Because the music is supposed to set a mood. It's not supposed to be the main point of something. And sometimes game music is louder than everything else in the game. And that really takes me out of the experience. So I lower it to 30. The soundtrack in this game, though, is very good. So I would kind of put it... Maybe I should have put it to 40 instead. I'm going to keep it at 30 because I do a Let's Play. And I'm not going to change it mid-Let's Play. But I would recommend putting it to 50 or 40. Because it's just that good. Sound effects volume. I recommend keeping that at 100. Same with dialogue volume. If you have a very... If you feel like the sound effects of wands and stuff is higher than people yelling out the spells, then you can lower the sound effects. Volume, dialogue specifically, I always say keep that at 100 no matter what game you're in. Because typically the voice is always lower than the rest of the game for some reason. But... sound effects volume, you can turn down if you want, depending on how loud or how not loud you want the game to be. Because there is no master volume on this game for some reason. I don't know why they decided that, but master volume is a very useful setting. I really wish they would have added it. This one you should not touch. Like, just don't touch this one, okay? As you can see up top right, adjust the pitch of your character's voice, just leave it alone. It makes it so your voice becomes artificial in the game. So let's say your character speaks like this, yo, how's it going? Then you can, if you change the beer pitch, you can sound like more chipmunk, like go, hey, how are you going? How's it going? And you're a guy still, by the way. And it sounds so unnatural and so wrong that I just would not recommend it, especially on the guy character. I don't like his voice acting, just a personal preference. And if I ever changed this, I would cry. Now, I have no idea why they have the option called mute all in here, but just leave it off. There you go. It's now muted. Everything is muted. I don't know why that's an option, but it's an option. Then you have display subtitles. I always have to keep this on. If you want to immerse yourself, I recommend turning it off. But because I'm recording again and because I'm doing a let's play of the game, I have it on. And sometimes it's also useful if you just want to look, if you like don't catch what they actually say and they have a weird accent or something. Reading the subtitles can also help you understand what they say. So it's always like a nice thing to keep on. But if you really want to immerse yourself and become your character and roleplay a bit, you can keep it off. Mono audio. Let me just make you hear what it does. So as you can hear, the audio now became very similar on both of your ears. It's no longer some music on the left and some other music on the right. Everything became like one mono. Mono means one audio. If I turn it off again, you can hear that it's more atmospheric, more behind you in one ear and more to the left in the other ear. Like it just makes the audio more immersive and more around you, so to speak. So that's what this setting does. So always keep it as stereo. This is what I would recommend. Which is off. Stereo's off, in case you were wondering. Audio configuration, I mean, kind of, that depends entirely on what you want. If you're playing on a screen, you can do home cinema or TV. Night mode, I don't even know what that does. I don't know what soundbar is. But if you're wearing headphones, it's very simple. Just pick headphones. If you're playing on a home cinema, use the home cinema. If you're playing at night, you can try out night mode if you want. Something soundbar, you can try out soundbar. If you're using TV speakers, you can turn on the TV speaker thing. The reason why these are different is because different audio stuff has different audio spectrums. I'm not gonna go over all of this now. Just know that you should pick the one you're listening to audio with. I'm pointing towards my headset because I'm using headphones. So anyway, recommend headphones, by the way, for the best experience, but that's just me. So now here we have some of the game stuff that I would recommend you kind of mess with, I guess. So first we have difficulty. It's just the difficulty of the game. I'm playing on hard, although normal, easy, and story. Like, it's not horrible. All of them are kind of fun. Controller rumble, preference thing. I would not recommend you invert anything. And this is speed toggle. It means that if you're using a controller or you're using shift, if you click shift once and you keep pressing forward, they always sprint without you holding shift down. Let's say that as an example. But if you turn this off, then you need to hold down shift in order for them to sprint. Instead of just keep pressing forward after you release shift. That's what this one does. Then you have camera sensitivity and camera acceleration stuff. I turned these two down to 0 because I don't like camera acceleration or aiming acceleration. So instead I increased camera sensitivity and aiming sensitivity I kept to 1. You can copy these settings if you want, but it doesn't really matter too much. Camera relative targeting. I would recommend you turn that off because that means you can target things off screen. And it really helps you because when you throw objects in the game with magic, typically you can only throw it at enemies you see. But with this, you can target enemies behind you by using the thumbstick or by using your S button, I'm guessing, without being able to see the enemy. And that really saves you in certain situations. So that's what I would recommend anyway. Again, follow camera speed. I just kept that to 1. I like to not mess with the base settings again. And this is not also something I don't mess with. Just the controller layout, in case you don't know how the controller plays. And this is the mouse and keyboard setup. You can change things however you want. Although I think default is always kind of better. This is how it's meant to be played, but that's up to you. Camera shake is one of those, again, preference settings. If you like camera shake, you can turn this all the way up. If you don't like camera shake, you can turn it down. I turned mine down a bit to 0.2 because I don't mind camera shake, but I don't want it to shake my whole screen, so I just turned it down to 0.2. And I feel like 0.2 is the sweet spot when it comes to camera shake, so I'll recommend that for you guys too. Again, I don't like to mess with these settings because they just kind of, I don't know, like they're just kind of ruining the whole game experience the developers intended. So I don't like to enable them. Although you can change this to be left-handed if you're left-handed. So right stick is moving around and left stick is kind of looking. Again, depends entirely on what you want to do. Camera dead zone. Again, everything else is default for me here, by the way. You just do whatever you want to do. Minimap pathing on all that stuff on. I don't know if the minimap is here, but I turned the minimap off. I think it's in here then. Did I? Yeah, I did. So this is minimap. You can turn minimap off. You can turn off the different like HUD in this area, and depending on the HUD and the different things you like and don't like, you can just turn off the things you feel like you don't need or want. I specifically felt like the minimap was unnecessary in the game, so I turned it off. Very simple. Again, up to personal preference, but I feel like the damage numbers and the minimap is better with them off. So yeah, that's my personal setup with the settings and everything. All right, now that that has been done, it is about time I show you guys how the game actually performs in Hogsmeade, Hogwarts, and out here in the wild. With these specific settings I have selected that I feel makes sense for an optimized game experience. Again, feel free to play around with the settings. I'm not here to tell you to use these specific settings. I'm not here to tell you that I'm right about everything I say. I'm here to give you a starting point. I'm here to also tell you what you can and cannot do. Or how different things look. And kind of save you from getting the wrong information, although I'm not sure if everything I've said is 100% correct. This video has taken about 2 hours to make. Longer video than I expected. I'm gonna have to cut quite a bit in it to make sure everything is okay. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this little taste of future optimization guides and stuff. But yeah, I'll leave you with future Setchbo, who is gonna record Hogsmeade and stuff and talk about some issues with the utilization of CPU, some GPU issues, if the settings actually worked or not, and what he might have adjusted. So over to you, future Setchbo. Thank you, past Setchbo, and welcome to you lovely people. You should now know what each setting does in the game and exactly how it affects your experience. Next step here in the future Setchbo land is looking at your actual hardware and determining what is best for you and how it actually performs in Hogsmeade and Hogwarts and out here in the wild. So to begin with, let's take a look at the statistics to my top left. Before I do that though, if you guys don't know how to show your own statistics, both NVIDIA, AMD, and actually also Intel, to my knowledge, has built-in software that helps monitor the statistics of the graphics card and also the CPU, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if the CPU is also there, but you can also use Task Manager if you're very desperate. There are also other programs you could use and download. In this case, I'm using RiverTuner Statistics Server and MSI Afterburner to monitor my own hardware. With that being said, let's start with the graphics card top left. So first of all, you can see I have an RTX 3080 10GB. I forgot the B, but just ignore that and imagine there's an invisible B right there. You can see that it's only being used 83%. Typically, you actually want 99% usage. I'll go into that more later, because we have already managed our settings. But again, you typically want the graphics card to do the heavy load or taking on the most work, because that way you can get the most performance out of your graphics card. Secondly, we have the clock of the graphics card. it doesn't mean too much other than you can see if your graphics card is boosting to its max level. It pretty much means that if you look at the box of your graphics card, or find out what your graphics card does online, you see it has a boost max amount in megahertz. And if that shows up there, that means your graphics card is at least boosting to its max frequency, which means it should be doing as much work as it can while still not being utilized properly. Next we have temperatures, which are important. We can just talk about temperatures for both the CPU and GPU for this one. Temperatures in PCs are important because when the temperatures reach a certain level, all your hardware needs to try to cool down, and to do that, it actually lessens its own performance. And that means that you get lower FPS because your system is too hot or your PC is too hot. As you can see, 60 degrees Celsius that I'm at right now for the graphics card, and for my CPU, it is 53. A very safe temperature. Now, you don't need to panic if you're at 70 or 80. It's more 90 and 100 where you need to very worry. But just as a rule of thumb, you want to try to cool it as much as possible at around 80 to receive the best results possible. At least that's my advice. You can still try to push it up to 90 if you really want to, but just know that around 90 and up to 100 is kind of where everything tries to clock down in order to cool down and not kind of burn itself and kill itself. So if you have temperatures up in the 80s and 90s, unless, of course, the Ryzen CPU is kind of built for that, but if you have temperatures all the way up there, then you need to do something to your system to cool it down, because then otherwise you're going to have performance issues, and that might actually be your issue if you figure out you have a high temperature. Now that you understand how temperatures work in this case, let's go down to VRAM. VRAM is very important. Well, it's actually not that important. Well, it used to not be that important, but then we kind of got games that eat a lot of VRAM. And now we have a situation where some older cards don't work anymore when they're powerful enough to still run the game at max settings or ultra settings, but they can't because they don't have enough VRAM. Think of it as graphics card's RAM. It works the same way your system RAM does, but specifically for the graphics card to remember how to load specific things. You can see that my VRAM lies at 7,442 megabytes. My max is 10, so you can see that I have about 2,500 that I can kind of take advantage of. But typically it doesn't go above 9,000 for me. And even if it goes to 9,000, I still get stutter, which still kind of sucks for me, and it's not fun to get stutter because you're running out of VRAM. So typically that's what I meant when I explained the settings to you. That's what past Setchbo meant when he tried to explain the settings to you to figure out exactly how to limit it for your VRAM. Now, when it comes to the CPU itself, you can see the utilization there. That actually means nothing. The i5-12600KF is the one I have in my system. And as you can see, it uses 35% of its cores. Depending on if you've turned any cores off, and depending on exactly what game you play, that number up there of the overall CPU means nada. It means nothing. It's the specific core usage that counts. So if you want to measure your CPU, measure the cores, not the overall CPU. With that being said, let's go down to the clock. It works the same way as the clock does for your actual graphics card. It's just this time it is specific to your CPU. And it still kind of measures how much performance you can squeeze out of the CPU before it kind of becomes unstable and kind of doesn't work anymore. But that's, again, kind of irrelevant. But just know that hopefully you can see that that's kind of used to determine whether or not your temperatures are kind of, beating your megahertz down. Let's say I have 90 degrees Celsius in my system and very hot in my room, and I don't have a lot of cooling on my PC. Because of that, you might see the megahertz fluctuate a lot, and you might also notice that its max megahertz, it says in the case or when you bought it, it doesn't actually boost up there. And typically that also depends on if you want the silicon lottery or if it actually boosts properly or something. But you try to measure anyway to see how far it is willing to boost at a normal temperature, and then see how far it boosts when you're pretty much max out this temperature. You shouldn't willingly do it, but you just check to see if your actual temperature is okay. And if you have temperature issues, you can see that the megahertz will go down. Same thing goes for the graphics card. It'll try to clock itself down to protect itself. Both of them will do that. So it's very important that you manage your temperature. It's not just a gimmick to have a good temperature on your PC. It is to help your system manage the heat so it doesn't damage its components, or at least so it doesn't give you a worse experience than it's supposed to. Next up, we have RAM. Normal RAM, which is just PC RAM. Now, depending on if you run out of RAM or VRAM, your PC might act weird. VRAM is only a problem specifically for games, while RAM in general is something you want a lot of, because that lags your whole PC if you kind of run out of that. Again, it might not crash your PC or give you a blue screen of death or anything, but it's still something to keep an eye on, and as you can see, it uses a lot of RAM in the game. Again, I don't know why the game takes so much RAM, but if you have 16 gigabytes, I feel bad for you. The best thing you can do is kind of lower the actual settings until you kind of get below 16 or see how much it uses. Windows also tends to use a little bit more RAM than it's supposed to if you have above 16. So just see how much RAM you're using and see if you have enough of a headroom in order to play the game at the settings you have adjusted. Next up, we have the actual CPU cores, which are the ones you need to look at if you're trying to figure out whether or not your game actually has a CPU bottleneck, typically. And what we can see here is there's some kind of invisible variable in the CPU that causes some kind of weird CPU limit onto the game. It doesn't use cores more than 70%, 66% in a lot of cases. And that means that there's some kind of limit in the CPU. You can also see that my graphics card, again, does not go up to 80. It does not go above 85%. So again, for some reason, it doesn't actually go higher than 85%, which means there's some kind of other limitation in the system that stops it from going up to 99%, which is why you want the graphics card typically. So again, this is just to show that there is some kind of weird CPU limit that is not visible. And that is why these kind of games made on Unreal Engine 4 are so hard to kind of manage the CPU and GPU usage from. But typically, again, to try to fix it, or try to fix it as much as possible, you want to make sure your graphics card is the limit of the system, not your CPU or an invisible barrier in the CPU. So that is why you want to try to max out your graphics card limit, or percentage of your graphics card, so to speak. Below all the CPU cores, again, which I just said to show you guys that there's some kind of weird invisible limit. And I guess that the game takes use of a lot of cores. Oh, and just mentioning, there are 4 cores I don't really use in the game. I just disabled them. It's not a bug or anything. I disabled those cores because they're efficiency cores, not P cores, which are performance cores. Intel CPUs have P cores and E cores. Efficiency cores run with lower power and lower speed, where P cores are faster and get more power. In other words, they're worse cores, therefore I disabled them for the game, so they won't like make the better cores trip. It's the best kind of way to explain it, I guess. So that's why they're disabled. Again, that is completely optional. But if you want to do it, it's in Task Manager, Details, and Affinity. I would not recommend fiddling with it. It doesn't give you that much of a performance boost, if any, really. I just disabled them because I thought they might do something. But there's no like proof I can provide for you that they actually help or anything. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out for. Next up, we got the actual FPS stats. They're pretty much just what they show. We have the 0.1% lows, the 1% lows, the minimum FPS, the average FPS, and then we have the normal FPS that you normally see in every other game that shows your FPS. Which kind of just represents the current FPS and the current second that you're seeing. And then we also have a frame time graph, which is something that you may see for the first time, that you might not understand what it actually means. So what a frame time graph is, it shows you the time it takes for the frame to be delivered after the next frame. And typically, the higher your FPS is, the faster the next frame gets delivered. Let's say you're playing at 60 FPS, you have countless stutters, and everything kind of feels horrible. Going to a higher FPS is going to make you notice it less, because the frames are going to be less spaced apart. So you won't notice that there's a weird stutter that kind of just makes it so, let's say you turn the camera, you notice a big stutter, boom, picture taken here, that's the frame. And then boom, picture taken here. And then you notice this weird stutter from there to there. Now, at a higher FPS, there's going to be multiple pictures of frames in between those two. So it's going to be like stutter, stutter, stutter instead of just stutter, stutter. Hopefully, I do an okay amount of explaining in that regard. Just know that the less amount of time it takes between the frames to kind of get shown, the more smooth everything is going to be. Because then you get shown more frames more often, which is what FPS means. Which shows you every single frame per second that you get to see. And again, that's just what frame time means. It means the time between all of those frames. It's also associated with input latency, because input latency typically means that you won't see the next frame before you input it, because it doesn't show before a certain amount of time. Which also means the higher the FPS, technically, the less the input latency. Don't quote me on that though. That is more of a theoretical thing I'm kind of assuming right now. If you know better, you can leave a pinned comment in the description that explains some of these things better than I did. And if I'm wrong, again, about the whole it decreases input latency, because I'm not sure about that, I will pin that comment and actually having you explain how that works. But now that I've explained everything, let me explain the issues I see based on my statistics here. First of all, like I mentioned, I have a invisible CPU bottleneck, or invisible CPU limit that causes my graphics card to not be used properly. Now, you could also argue that there's something else in the system, like RAM, or some weird clock issue with my CPU, or the temperatures are high. But you can see the temperatures are fine. I'm not using 32 gigs of RAM on my system, which is what I have in the system. Also, it's dual memory. I also seem to be using the cores at about half, so there's no actual CPU limit to the C. Like, none of my cores are being used to their full potential. They're just kind of using a lot of cores, kind of half. It might be a bottleneck based on the engine. So Unreal Engine 4 seems to have this issue throughout multiple modern games. But yeah, as you can see, there's no immediate limit, just shows why my FPS is limited at 114 right now. But I suspect, like a lot of other people suspect, there's an invisible, weird metric behind the CPU that somehow slows down the delivery of frames delivered to the graphics card. Hence why the graphics card does not get used, and hence why the CPU does not get used. It's like someone is trying to stop the CPU from delivering the frames, you know? It's like someone goes in front of the CPU, kind of blocking them. It's like, oh yeah, I want you to deliver the thingy to the graphics card. Graphics card is like, give me, come on, give me, I'm ready to receive it. And then the other person's like, oh, stop, no, you can't deliver that to the graphics card, stop it. Just keep going in front of them. This is how it feels like. And that also means that the cores don't get used to their full potential, because they just can't take a step forward and actually get used, because the freaking thing is in the way. Anyway, that's what I imagine is happening with the CPU. Don't know if that's the case. You can also see that I'm close to my VRAM limit, which is not something you want. You don't want your VRAM limit to be that close. Okay, now that has been dealt with, let me again tell you about more of the issues. So we had the graphics card issue, right? We had the CPU issue. We also see that frame time graph is actually kind of smooth. Now, the frame time graph itself, you want that to be as flat as possible. If you see if you see big lines going up and down, that means you have stutter or uneven frame times, which can look a lot like stutter as well. So it's very important to kind of try to manage that and make sure that the frame time itself is not kind of jumping all over the place. But as you can see, I have 0.1% lows, at least they are 64. Then I have 1% lows, which are 100. So you can see that I have a pretty stable FPS right now. I don't go below 64 FPS ever, according to the thingy here. Of course, you can try to measure it in 0.00001, and you might get a low FPS, but you won't notice that. You won't even notice the 0.1% lows. The 1% lows are kind of the ones I would look at as the minimum you might notice. You also have the minimum FPS, which is the minimum FPS that it thinks you might notice, technically. This is how I look at it. You also have the average FPS, which just kind of shows the average. And then you have the live FPS, as I call it, where it just shows the live FPS you have right now while looking in this specific area. All right, so how do we fix the issues we noticed? So we noticed the graphics card is not being used properly, and we noticed there's some kind of CPU issue. It's kind of easy. If you have a weight, let's say you have a weight, and you put more weight on the side of the CPU, you put the CPU in the weight, and you put the graphics card on the other weight, and for some reason the CPU now weighs more. What you need to do is you need to lessen the weight of the graphics card. So let's say you have 10 balls on top of the graphics card, you have 10 balls on top of the CPU. Then you just need to make sure that the graphics card gets one of the balls the CPU has. Or you need to kind of make sure the graphics card gets used more, or it weighs more than the CPU does. That's a horrible analogy. But anyway, what's happening here is we need to make the graphics card work as hard as it can so it becomes the limit instead of the invisible barrier in the CPU. And to do that, we need to up the settings in the game to make the CPU work hard. To make the TPU work harder, to make sure that the TPU now says, okay, I'll work at my hardest now that you tell me to, right? And the easiest way to do that to begin with. And before I do anything, note. Oh, I actually have two quality on. I didn't mean to do that, but balance is even worse. So I would not recommend doing that if you have a CPU invisible limit, as I like to call it. But again, if your graphics card is being used at 100% or 99% is more specific, if it's constantly being used at 99% at the actual, when overlooking, let's say, the same area here or any area in the game, if the graphics card you have is being used at 99%, because if it's weaker than mine, it might be, then you have nothing to worry about. Then you have the perfect kind of setup for you, and you can just test how it performs in Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. And technically, you don't need to watch the rest of the video unless you want to see how I perform in those areas with my configuration. But yeah, as long as your graphics card is performing at 100 or 99, specifically 99% again, then this does not apply to you. You're good. That means your TPU is the limit. So don't change the settings I'm changing now to stick with the configuration you already have. And change them based on looks and the amount of FPS you want evenly. You just go with that. So to maximize your FPS, like I mentioned, you want 99% graphics card utilization for the most part. Easiest way to do that from what I've done here is to turn off upscaling. Go to what I recommended in the last part of the video, what me recommended. This say like enable NVIDIA DLA or enable TAA, depending on if you have NVIDIA DLA like as an option. You can also use TAA low if you want. But again, I recommend one of these two. Whoops. And then since I enabled NVIDIA DLA, now my graphics card has to work harder. Because now I'm not upscaling anymore. Now I'm actually using the resolution that my screen is. So immediately you see that my graphics card utilization has now jumped up to 98, 99, 97, all the way up there. And of course you also notice that for some reason I'm getting less FPS now, which is weird technically, but alright game. That is how you get the most out of your graphics card. Although, for some reason, in this game, it seems like you're not getting the best FPS out of it. Let me just double check. What are the 0.1% lows right now? 98. Okay. My average FPS is 104. Current FPS, or live FPS, is 120 something. Okay. I mean, I guess we can see that technically our FPS has got more stable. Because now it is the 0.1% lows at 70. And we have a graphics card bottleneck instead of a CPU, or the invisible CPU bottleneck that we saw before. So now our graphics card is carrying the CPU on its back, not the other way around. Which is what you typically want. But if you're okay with having not used or gotten your money's worth out of your graphics card, you could again just turn on upscaling. If that does give you more, let's see, if that does give you more FPS, then you don't have to change anything. Again, these games act weird, and it acts kind of different for each person. Let me just quickly go ahead and do the same thing I did before. Now, remember, we got 100 and something FPS before. Now, you'll notice that we actually have more FPS now for some reason. I technically don't know why. All I know is that now our CPU is working harder than our GPU is, and for some reason that is giving us more FPS. Again, depending on your configuration and what CPU and GPU you have, this may vary big time. It's just important to find a balance, and the easiest way to figure out the invisible CPU issue is to max out your graphics card. Again, experimentation is key. As an example, I figured out that even if I have 80% utilization with these settings I have right now, for some reason, my FPS is still higher than if I max out my graphics card. So what I will do is, I will keep this configuration, and then we'll see if how, I guess, both perform in a town, or in Hogsmeade and Hogwarts. But first, let me just show you how it performs while running back and forth in this location. I'll do that 3 times just to show how it works. So I'll just run up to the tree and back to this thingy 3 times. Just to show you guys the actual FPS. And I'll reset everything just to show you my 0.1% lows, my 1% lows, my minimum, my average, and my current FPS. And of course the frame time graph. And the amount of load it technically has on my my poor GPU. Alright, so I'm just gonna run back and forth to this tree actually, that's probably easier. This is the second run. You can see that again the 0.1% lows are at 63, so that's pretty good. There's nothing wrong with that. Although I'm fairly sure that when I had my graphics card be the limit, I had a higher 0.1% lows. But again, that could just be because I didn't run back and forth like this. But you can see that I have a stable 135, 100 something FPS. Nothing too crazy. Now, depending on if you have a graphics card limit or not, you could limit it to 120. It seems like a good limit for at least my FPS. That way you make sure it doesn't jump up to like 126 and then all the way down to 118 immediately afterwards. That way it just kind of goes from 118 to 120 to kind of hit a stable experience. And it's kind of what I would recommend for people to do if they were in my shoes. Just kind of limit it a bit above or below your max FPS. Or your average FPS / max FPS. You can see my average is actually 123. Which is a great place you can put a limit. So 120 would be a great limit for me. Because of this tool I have on my left side now with the AVG, the average FPS, I can actually see where I should put my limit. And it seems like putting my limit at 120 would be the best option. For my configuration to stop the FPS from fluctuating. Again, you won't really get a big performance benefit from it. I know I ran back too much, by the way, but it's okay. Now, you won't actually get a huge performance benefit from limiting your FPS to a certain amount. And especially if you're limited to a lower amount, like 60 or 40 or 30 or whatever you want to limit it to. It might not actually benefit you as much, because then when you get a spike, it might actually be worse than if you get a spike when you have a higher FPS. That is why you need to put it close to your max FPS to try to make sure you get the best smooth experience, while also making sure you don't notice the stutters as much. Now, if you have an FPS that is very close on average to 60, then put it to 60. If you have an average FPS closer to 40, then maybe put it to 40. Although, the typical FPS limits would be 30, 60, 75, 90, 120. Those are like the areas that are very nice to kind of have FPS limits on. But you can technically do it everywhere that the game allows you. So let's go in here and find an FPS limit so I can show you exactly how it performs with the FPS limit on. Oh yeah, I have 360. I don't know why I did that. Anyway, this is within the 60 FPS limit. So now we have a 60 FPS limit. You will immediately see that everything performs okay. Like, there's no big difference. But if I were to get a huge stutter now, things will... It would be more noticeable. Like, if I turn the camera and I get very huge stutter, I will notice that it's less smooth. I will see it more. But I still have a very stable experience. All depends on when it loads. You also see the frame time graph is very stable. Not too much is happening. It's very good when the frame time graph is very stable. Not too much is going on. Although there we have a little bit of a few dips. But it's okay. Again, it seems to stick to 60 FPS pretty well. So that's nice and everything. So if you have a 60 FPS limit, it's fine. Just try to keep it stable and everything. And it also needs to be said that when you put an FPS limit as aggressive as this, you will see that your graphics card percentage goes down and your CPU percentage goes down. Because they won't work as hard anymore, which also means you're going to get cooler temperatures. So an FPS limiter is very, very useful if you have too high temperatures in your system. So if you have temperature issues and you can't fix them by going into your PC and putting more fans in there, limit your FPS for your own sake to something more reasonable. Again, depends entirely on what FPS you imagined when past me said, hey, think about the FPS you want and then try to get that FPS at the cost of quality. But with that out of the way, let's actually remove the limit. Let's put a 120 limit, which is more reasonable for my situation. So we have a 120 limit now. And see how that performs, which performs pretty much as smooth as the 60 FPS limit. Which is exactly what you want, by the way. You also see that it fluctuates less now. It doesn't go below 120 as much as it did before. Which again is a very positive indication of a great FPS limit you put down. It doesn't matter too much if it goes below or a little bit above. As long as it tries to stick to this specific FPS, you're going to have a smoother experience than if you uncapped it. But when it comes to performance and getting the most FPS out of it, you typically want to uncap it. But an FPS limit is a good way to kind of just make sure that you have a more stable experience, like I've said before. But that being said, it's completely optional. You'll barely notice a difference. At most, you will probably notice you have certain areas that are smoother than others, and some areas that are less smooth than others if you have an uncapped FPS. So again, completely up to you whether you want to cap it or not. It doesn't technically give you more performance. That's not how it works. But it does make it so it says reduce stuttering. That depends entirely on the area. If you're loading something in the game, like going through a door or something, you're still going to get stutter whether or not you have an FPS limit. It won't stop it. So that is something to be very aware of. But anyway, that is the test run outside of Hogsmeade and outside of Hogwarts. So the next test run I will run with the whole thingy I've made here. I will do inside of Hogsmeade. So a couple minutes future Sketch Bro will do that for you guys. So you will be right here, right now. Future Sketch Bro, rock him and roll him. Indeed, I will pass me. I will indeed rock him and roll him, or whatever he said. He's not very smart. It's past me for you. Anyway, we are now at Hogsmeade, and as you can see, our FPS is stuck around 1.9 before we enter Hogsmeade, right outside of it. Off screen, I actually need to tell you guys that I went ahead and restarted the game to mitigate the whole VRAM issue I have on my system, and I actually forgot that I had turned this to quality, so I turned it to balanced again, which gave me actually more FPS than before, which is still weird to me because my graphics card still only works less, but okay. One thing you'll notice, the further in we go into Hogsmeade, our graphics card will start working less, and you will also see that our FPS goes down, which is a heavy indicator of a CPU-ish bottleneck. Now, it is very weird why that happens, but Hogsmeade just works this way, and there's no way to really optimize it, so you will have stutters or performance issues in Hogsmeade. If you have horrible stutter, I would recommend restarting the game and seeing if you have the whole VRAM limit issue that I have. Again, I'm going to run back and forth 3 times to show you guys exactly how Hogsmeade performs. You'll see that it's specifically bad in the middle of Hogsmeade. We go down to like 80 FPS. Again, I'll actually reset this so you can see the 1% lows and such. Again, you can see that you might notice a drop to 45, 38 is like the worst. Also, the frame time graph is kind of all over the place. So if you turn your camera really fast here, like this, or very smooth turn the camera, you will probably notice that there's an uneven frame time, and you might see some stutters because of the fluctuating FPS in Hogsmeade. But this is also one of the most heavy areas in the game, so you don't need to panic. If your FPS goes way down below your targeted FPS, try to up some settings to make the TPU work harder, or just lower some settings to see if that somehow helps. Just to help yourself out a bit. Then that wouldn't be such a bad idea, I don't think, to do. Again, just try to adjust the settings so you get the desired FPS. Hogwarts and Hogsmeade are your two main targets. If you want the best experience that's more consistent, then I would actually recommend adjusting your settings for Hogwarts or Hogsmeade, just so you actually know exactly what to expect. But just so you know, most of your time is going to be outside of Hogwarts and Hogsmeade. So if you're too worried about the FPS in Hogwarts and Hogsmeade, you really shouldn't be, because it's not that, like, important.
Hogsmeade, here I come.
Yeah, now for the last little run. You also see, as soon as we leave Hogsmeade again, our FPS comes right back. It's such a weird limit Hogsmeade has here. It's just so weird. But again, you'll notice that my graphics card works less and that my CPU is still not maxed out. Some kind of weird invisible CPU limit. But again, the FPS isn't horrible. So again, as long as you're above your wanted FPS, you should be okay. You could also still just mess with the settings if you want more FPS. Again, I showed you what the FPS or what the settings did in the past. So if my own configuration, my own optimized settings don't work for you, you can make your own optimized settings. Like I said, click on the settings, turn them off, or turn them to the lowest and to the highest, see what the difference is. If you don't notice a difference, you could technically also leave it at low. Although I prefer to always increase it to medium just in case you might notice them later. But this is entirely playable to me. The stutters aren't huge because I have such a high FPS, but if you have a lower FPS, you might notice them more. So that's still something to kind of need to keep note of. I'll go right into the middle of Hogsmeade now just to show you like the worst spot. It seems like the worst spot is like right around here. And near this shop. Right here specifically, for some reason, it's like the worst area. And it seems like I do notice some stutter and my FPS lowering, but also seems to be like at 38 FPS at least, so it's not horrible. And it's definitely playable. So figure out what kind of FPS you want in Hogsmeade and what kind of FPS you want in Hogwarts. And if it's not a big stutter mess for you, then just try to deal with the FPS going down, because you cannot fix Hogsmeade, and spoiler for when I go to Hogwarts too, you also can't fix Hogwarts. What I'm showing you right now is just the actual difference in performance from outside these two areas and then actual going to them again. Again, this is completely playable. There are no issues that should stop you from playing the game properly like this. Just know that it will fluctuate and you can't really do anything about it, except try to see how the minimum FPS you want is going to be, or what the minimum FPS you want is going to be. Now, with that being said, I'm going to go right over to Hogwarts now. And then Future Setchbo, or Future Setchbo, is going to introduce you on how Hogwarts performs when it comes to my poor hardware. Alright, so I am now at Hogwarts. So you'll see that I'm going across the bridge leading over to Hogwarts. Right now I have 90 FPS, or 93 FPS. You will notice that Hogwarts is slightly worse than Hogsmeade, and my guess is just that Hogwarts is way bigger. So there's way more to load, not to mention there are more people at Hogwarts. You'll also notice that when I go through the doorways, by the way, I'm not going to do like 3 rounds here because there's not really much point to it. You notice that I'll get big stutters in the frame graph as soon as I go through doors, because it has to load the area behind the door as soon as I go over to it. And when it does that, you just see a big spike in the frame time graph. Again, you won't obtain stable FPS in Hogwarts and Hogsmeade. You might as well throw that out the window. But then again, like I said, most of your time in the game also won't be in these locations. So it's not the end of the world if you don't get the best performance possible in these locations. But again, this is for you to see what minimum FPS you might want. So again, if you want the best, you need to figure out what the best FPS is for you and apply that to these locations so you can tolerate them, is pretty much what I'm trying to say. So as long as you can tolerate these areas, then it's fine. You can also see that I have reached my VRAM limit. So in a biddy, I might actually stutter. And after I start stuttering, my frame time graph is going to go crazy and my FPS is going to dip. So I might actually have to lower some settings in the future. Again, depending on your graphics card, you might have to do so too. When it comes to how the actual VRAM performs in this game. Because this game eats VRAM like so many other Unreal Engine 4 games coming out at the moment. In 2023, it's crazy. You also see that there are some areas in Hogwarts that perform better than others. Like I said, the situation I've shown you are like the worst parts in the game. So if you can tolerate those, you're pretty much safe to play the game to its limit.
My older brother used to tell.
Again, I don't really see a big visual difference between having FSR on and off, depending entirely on how it functions. I had a big stutter, by the way. But anyway, hopefully this gives you a great idea on how Hogwarts performs. You also see that my actual RAM in my system is at 21 gigabytes usage. My goodness. It could be because there's not enough VRAM, so it has to go into my actual RAM. Although I'm not quite sure about that. But yeah, that is also gonna be my optimization guide. Let me just exit Hogwarts really fast in some way or another, so I can end the video in a less FPS hungry place. Oh yeah, let's end the video over here. Why not? We end it on this big thing in the wall. Alright, there we go. Kind of beautiful. This game is kind of pretty. Again, hopefully you guys actually found the FPS you wanted and optimized the game the way you want it. And hopefully my configuration also helped you out. Again, I'm no professional. This is the first optimization video I've made. I will, of course, try to shorten it down in the future and improve. Whoops. And become better at it. I just want to make sure that I don't make any horrible mistakes and tell people something that's completely wrong, although I might already have done that for all I know. But you can see right now that my showcase is as in-depth that I'm gonna go. This took me like 4 hours in total to actually make, because I had to delete some takes and everything, because I'm doing all this on the fly. I'm not actually like, I don't actually have any scripts in front of me or anything. So I don't really have any like guides to go off of, and I don't really see any other YouTubers do the same thing. I just kind of wanted to make an optimization guide because no one else is making any. But I really want to show players how to optimize their games, because it's just not fair that you have to pay so much money you can't even play them. Even having to lower settings is arguably not worth the money anymore. But again, it's very important you figure out what FPS you want, and it's also very important you figure out what settings you're willing to turn off and on, or lower and higher, to get the preferred quality of the game, or to get the preferred visual fidelity of the game that you want. Like I mentioned, there are different settings that can do different things, and if you don't get the performance you want or the FPS you want, there are multiple ways of going around that. Typically, if you have a CPU limit, you turn off, or yeah, CPU limit, you turn off FSR and make your GPU work harder. Now you can see right now it should work harder. Yeah, it's at 97, 96. But for some reason in this game, since there is no actual CPU core limit, when you do so, you actually lower your FPS. So it's very confusing how everything works in this game, and it's very hard to make make a proper optimization guide for the game because of that one singular reason, that there's an invisible bottleneck somewhere in everyone's system when it comes to how this engine handles things. But with that being said, I do hope someone, hopefully you, found this whole guide useful. If you did, consider leaving a comment, liking and subscribing, all that stuff. I plan on making more of these, and of course, I plan on improving. This has been a very noob experience for me. This has taken multiple takes. I keep saying all the time. It's horrible and embarrassing, but you know it happens. I can't do much about it. I also think it's very interesting that I can show the statistics on my left side and have you guys and explain them to you in case you don't understand what they mean and how it works. I also want to like spread out everything into chapters, so hopefully people who want to watch what settings are can skip to the next section if they want. And the other people who want to know exactly how the performance shows in game can do that too if they want to skip to that. It's just very important to me that you guys got something out of the video and take something away from it that helps you in your own game. Like some of the settings I explained, for as an example, it can be generalized throughout all the games. You can also try to see if you can use some tool to help look at your actual usage on your CPU and graphics card. Try to get the best performance out of your hardware in that regard. So I do believe that if you take something away from this video, I have at least accomplished my mission. If you just take some annoying guy talking about things he doesn't seem to know anything about away from the video too, I mean, fair enough. Although I have tried to learn as much as I can about this stuff to help other people. And honestly, that's my goal. So if you don't like me making these videos, you can tell me in the comment section on what I can improve. And besides the time, okay, I know you don't want to sit through like a 2-hour long video, okay? Not that. But what I should probably focus more on and what I can focus less on, and what you kind of have difficulty understanding and stuff like that, you know. If you don't like my video and don't want me to make more, then tell me what I can do better. So maybe, hopefully, I can have you more understand me in the future, understand me better. I'm not native English, so terms in English are kind of hard at times. But I do my best. And when it comes to hardware, I do know my hardware. I do know my PC stuff. I have been trying to study this as much as I can. Hopefully you have a good gaming experience and can optimize your settings properly now. Hopefully my optimized settings might also have helped you if you had a weaker graphics card. Or just lower your own settings if that's the case. But yeah, I do hope you guys enjoyed watching once again. Consider liking, subscribing, all that jazz. Hope to see you guys in another optimization guide and one of my Let's Plays. And as always, stay awesome.